All good, all good. And on a more serious note, for anyone in financial services, we recently just collaborated with a organization called Mazars, and Mazars is actually someone I used to use to help us do a whole bunch of work in previous roles. I really value them, and think they have a lot of credibility. And we did a podcast, video format, audio format, all about Dora. So yeah, it's a good one. Dora is one of those big, scary regulations. So for anyone in financial services, go and check it out. James, was there anything that you just wanted to cover off as we're waiting for people to join us? I can still see people join in, so I don't want to rush in here.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what I'm allowed to talk about because we have versions that are really exciting that are coming out in this release, but then we have imminent updates that are coming out to them very soon. But I'm sure we'll cover that over the course
No
of
worries.
today.
I don't want to put you on the spot too much there.
That's okay. But
That's
yeah,
cool.
I loved your Dora session, by the way. They're really practical guys over at Mazars, those two that you had
Yeah,
on the podcast. It was good listening.
yeah, it's quite a nerdy episode, but it's a really nerdy topic. As anyone knows who's dealing with financial regulations, you really have to get into the details. So yeah, Mazars were great. Awesome. Well, we're going to make a start here. So I appreciate everyone joining. I'm Daniel, community manager here at Gatekeeper. I've got James here, one of our James. I'm just going to butcher your title here, but one of our learning development designers. Is that
Close. Learning
almost
experience designer. Same
learning
thing.
experiences?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
always just mess your title up, so I
You got
knew
the
I was
spirit
going
of
to.
it. It's fine.
Yeah. James is a gatekeeper guru in many ways, and like I said, for anyone on this call who's heard me speak before, James actually helped me implement Gatekeeper quite a few years ago now, and was incredibly helpful. So, what is this webinar? A slightly different format to sort of this success hours session that we've done before. Gatekeeper runs updates to this VCLM product every single month, and you will normally receive some sort of email or in-app message. And when James and I have been talking about this, sometimes it can be hard to figure out, like, okay, how do we take these updates and start using them today? How do we get value out of it? One of the benefits of using a SaaS platform is that there's a really good life cycle of development work. So we're really excited to share a whole bunch of stuff here. Most of these features have been voted by a lot of you via the ideas forum, and I would just want to give a shout to that. It is on your homepage. You can view it via the Help Center button in the top right-hand corner. James, maybe you can show that just briefly when we get to sharing screen. We also make these updates based on where we see vendor and contract lifecycle management going in the future, and then also from when we interact with people at events that we put on or events that we attend with customers. We take your feedback, we go and work with product and figure some stuff out. So this episode of what this webinar is all about getting the most out of Gatekeeper. And we've got 5 areas we're going to cover today. We're going to cover smart forms, which is actually one of our bigger updates. It's a free update. It's really cool. It's something that I wanted as a user. I used to probably talk to James and others at Gatekeeper about it. So I'm really excited to see this. We've got some new best practice workflows, bulk eSign to cover. We've showed a little bit about this previously, but we'll go over this. We've got a little bit about market IQ and applying that to touchless contracts. We'll cover what touchless contracts are and what market IQ are for anyone who doesn't know that. We've also got some new team ownership and approvals in workflows, and then tin matching. And if we get any time after that, James maybe might share something else that he's excited about around SSO and some other stuff, but I'll hold it there for now. James, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I am excited to get to that.
I know.
Do want to go through that.
Okay, well, we're at a 6th right now, which is SSO Bypass, which kind of sounds weird and scary, but it's not. It's amazing for everyone. It's just a safe way for Gatekeeper. Yeah, anyway, we'll come to that soon. Awesome. Yeah. So to start with, we wanted to run a poll, and we actually have Lucy in the background, and you can't see her. She's producing this session, so I just want to give a shout out to Lucy, who's in the background. And Lucy, I should have checked with you just before we went live. I hope the polls are ready. If they're not, it's not the end of the world. But if it is ready, can we run poll number 1? Perfect. Cool. I was a little bit apprehensive there. So this poll it's just asking you how much you use or how often you use workflows within Gatekeeper. And the reason we're asking you this is to really get the most out of Gatekeeper. We absolutely recommend doing pretty much everything you can via workflows. Workflows are where automations are. It's where you can trigger cool stuff, and it's where everyone can come together and work. And a lot of these new features really make use of workflows. So if you can get started with workflows, whether it's through best practice workflows, which are our templates that James and I and some others have put together at Gatekeeper, you'll be on your way to becoming like a bit of a pro at using Gatekeeper. So we'll just give that 30 seconds. James, anything you want to say around workflows? Because I know when we started working together when I was a customer, you were very bullish on using workflows, and I can remember many sessions just nerding out around like how we can do things very differently to manual ways of working.
Yeah, I mean, this is a different Gatekeeper as well. So like back when you were onboarded, there's so many features
Unbelievably
that,
different.
like you said, you wish were present that are present now. But I think, I mean, yeah, if there's people in this call that are really don't want to work on workflows, they might be a bit grated by some of the opinions I throw out about these new features we're going to talk about today. But there's just so much automation and tailorability you can build in. There are almost, especially if you're working with one of our amazing implementation consultants on a workflow specific project, there's almost nothing you can't achieve in terms of like the structure, the layout, the collaboration you want with your users. They're just really good ways to take all the admin effort away, and also make sure everything's being done to the appropriate thorough standards, especially when it comes to things like if we're planning something for DORA in the near future, especially you want to make sure you're meeting particular industry regulations like that, where you need to be able to evidence that everything's being done above board.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And Lucy, can we please close the poll? And what we'll come on to in just a moment is smart forms, and we may just linger on smart forms a bit longer than the other ones. We've kind of set out roughly 10 minutes for each one. We may just spend a little bit longer on smart forms, a little bit less time on the others. It is a showcase. It's just to give you as fast as possible a snapshot of the features. And we will be looking to do a smart forms like proper configuration session in the near future. Perfect, James. So
yeah,
maybe if you can get Gatekeeper on screen, and
yep.
I'm going to ask a really basic question here, James. What is smart forms?
Can I give a prelude to that, because I'm aware you mentioned the ideas forum, and I was like, actually, Daniel's highlighted a really important thing there. So there are always three aspects of the ideas forum that I think of being really useful when it comes to like contributing to it. And let me just open it up because you asked Daniel to show where
No,
it was.
please
So
do.
in the top right of every Gatekeeper screen, you've got the knowledge base and where you can raise a support ticket. But the ideas forum, super useful for three reasons. One is, maybe actually four. One is you can see what other Gatekeeper customers are asking for. So if you're navigating the workflows area and you're looking at like the top voted ideas, you might start thinking about use cases that maybe you hadn't considered. And by the fact that these ideas are updated by our product owners, you'll be able to see that, well, this is actually something that's being planned, that's coming soon. I can start planning for how I can build that into my processes to make them better. The other aspect is, if you vote for things, not only will they be higher regarded by our product team, more likely to get done, when they eventually do get released, or when they move into these stages of like planning, development, and rollout, you'll get notified by our product owners. So it's one of those things that it might be good if you see an idea on here and you're like, that's a good, I'd like that to be added to Gatekeeper, but you don't want to be 6 months down the line and be like, oh, I didn't realize this had been deployed and I missed my chance to capitalize on it as long as possible in our Gatekeeper subscription. But also there's an element of, depending on how big these features are, oftentimes our product owners will reach out to some of the upvoters to say like, well, this product that you've upvoted, or maybe that you specifically posted, is very large in scope. It's not just something that maybe we could glean what you want from 3 or 4 lines of text. You want to have a call so that you can tell us how you want this feature to be, or what use cases you have in mind for this, because it's one that we're very interested in making sure that any new feature we work on works best for our customers. So anyone who's very active on here is ultimately going to be one of those people that we might reach out to if we're developing something that's a really big ticket item. So yeah, I'll navigate away from this though, and I'll go back to your
No,
question,
James, all
Daniel,
good.
that I
Seriously.
wasn't ignoring, honestly.
No, it's a good reminder. I used to vote heavily as a user in that section, but we've both seen my votes coming through for like the last year or two, which is kind of weird to
Yeah.
see. But yeah, back to smart forms. Give some context. What is it? I'll kind of hand off to you here.
Sure. Well, I'll give some background because we might have some long-time gatekeepers on the call, or we might have some people who aren't necessarily veterans yet, but most people will have seen a screen like this. So the data tab within a vendor or a contract record, because smart forms will apply to either. But within the data tab, what you obviously get are pre-built sections, like ways that you can segment the data yourself, or the ways that Gatekeeper segments it for you. So summary, basic information, standard data, and then if you add other sections like HubSpot data, additional information, it gets broken up. But one thing that you'll note on here already, I don't even have that many sections, and this data tab is getting quite long. So it was like the back end of last year, mid to late last year, we added a feature called custom tabs. So yeah, this is where if we have some veterans on the call, they'll be aware of this feature already. Where
if the feature I wanted, this one,
yeah,
was absolutely. I think
I
when
remember.
we were like during the buy-in process, it was one feature I was super excited for. So it's
I'm
good to see it come through. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
But that feature went live last year. Unfortunately, you weren't a Gatekeeper customer anymore. The idea that if you have these multiple groups that all form a unique goal, like if you have a GDPR, a data processing, an InfoSec section, you can move them all over to an InfoSec tab. So if your DPO or your data officer or your InfoSec team are logging into Gatekeeper, they don't have to scroll through all this to find the information they want. They can visit a tab along the top that is specific to them. So now we have the next iteration of that where smart forms comes in, and it's the same idea that you can segment data for a unified purpose. But what you can do now is add an extra dimension to that. And you can say, not only do I want to capture this metadata, because it's very useful to have it in Gatekeeper so we can easily access it and disseminate that information across members of the business, but we can say, how well does this meet our thresholds and standards? So that how well are we meeting compliance and performance that we've dictated should be in place for vendors and contracts. So I'm going to open up a smart form for this Adobe vendor here. And what this will look like, actually, let me just refresh to make sure I haven't been logged out due to inactivity. Just wanted to make sure. So I've created some smart forms for Adobe here. And like I said, these could be for unified goals. So I've got some different compliance related ones here. You might have like InfoSec, modern slavery, ESG. If I open up one of these, what you'll see is we have those groups of data below that's where we're capturing information that form part of, in this case, an InfoSec smart form. And in those forms, you can see these are the answers that have been given by someone. And I'll allude to what I mean by that later. But what the result of this data being provided here is, we can see how well is this vendor scoring based on what we want the answers to be, like what we want them to be aiming towards. And the reason this is very useful for like comparative benchmarking is twofold. The main one that we're seeing on this screen is if you have a vendor that you've been doing business with for quite a while and you're performing repeat assessments, like, you know, annual due diligence or biannual or quarterly, if it's a tier one, a critical vendor, what you'll start seeing is every time someone, it could be the vendor, it could be internal users, are iterating new submissions of these smart forms, Gatekeeper will capture those as a snapshot in this smart form tab. So not only when you come here do you see the latest data that's been filled out, so you seeing the current state of affairs, like what is the data processing, what is the data processing policies for this vendor, I'm seeing what was it. And in this case, take this with a pinch of salt, that these are all very condensed because I've only had this feature live for 2 weeks in this tenant. But yeah, you'd probably have this over the space of months or even years. But I'd be able to look back and see what was the score, in this case, yesterday, or in this case, you know, a week ago or the week before. But you're able to see like trends over time, like, is this vendor performing? Are they working to improve themselves? Are things slipping according to like how we are marking our standards for vendor performance? So it's just a really cool way of seeing the vendor compared to itself each time you've performed this, in this case, InfoSec GDPR assessment. But I'm going to leave this screen because this is one that I set up on our staging environment. So I'm going to move over to one in a production environment where It hasn't had as many iterative reviews performed, but I've got just as much data there. So we can navigate over here and I'll talk about that other aspect of comparative benchmarking. So let me just refresh this page because I will have been logged out here. So we're
Yeah,
in an EU environment here.
I was just going to say, James, the comparative like element here is actually what I am really excited about, because say I've got, I don't know, in one category of spend, I've got, you know, a few vendors that maybe are performing differently across, you know, any category, whether it's their data protection focus, their performance, maybe contractually. It'd be really cool to just assess that in a cool visual and just track them individually. So yeah, really bullish on this. But yeah, hand it over to you there.
No, that's fine. And that leads into this quite well, because I haven't really filtered this, but that's one of the things that you could be doing, or chopping up this view how you want. So this isn't a specific vendor view. This is the top level vendor repository view. And one thing some of you might have spotted that I did was I switched over to a specific saved view. This one's called compliance, and I put a little graph in it, so I know it's a smart form. But I've got another one over here that I can talk about in a little bit. That I know it's a use case that you're really interested in, Daniel. But what we have in this view is, rather than in this specific tenant, I've set up my smart forms a little differently. I haven't got a one separately for ESG, a separate one for GDPR, a separate one for modern slavery. In this environment, I was sort of painting with a bit more of a broad brush. I had a smart form called compliance and due diligence, where I just wanted a top level score, like what compliance score are my vendors meeting. But they do have subsections that meet those other topics, which I'll dive into in a second. But when you have a smart form, what you can enable in your repository level view is the score for that vendor for that form. So not only are you able to compare a vendor to its previous snapshots and see that trending graph, you can create a saved view like this, where you've got your vendors, their appropriate scores. And like Daniel said, if you wanted to dive a bit deeper into like how much are we spending with each vendor, you could very easily just select a specific field, like a summary field in here, like what's the total, how many live contracts and what's the total value of those contracts. And that might, you know, and I could have also included like vendor tiering, criticality and things like that. So I can compare like, well, we're spending this much with the vendor, but their compliance score is not great. What sort of risk assessments do I need to be performing, or monitoring needs to be going on there? So it's a really cool way of comparing your vendors across the whole board, with some extra summary information based on, you know, spend and things like that.
Jamie's just asked, is this only available at vendor level? So how's this based? What data points can we use?
Just like custom tabs, this is available for both vendors or contracts. I'll be honest, and Daniel, you and I have spoken about this. The main use cases we think of, and the two I've got set up in this environment, are vendor based, because they're the ones that initially jump out. Like, especially when you're thinking of benchmarking, compliance, performance, things like that. Vendors are the obvious things that you want to be able to score, and they're the easiest to think of scoring categories. But just how you would configure custom tabs or custom data for contracts or vendors, it works the same in either environment. It's agnostic if you want to do it for one or the other.
Yeah, James and I were just talking just before we went live about this, that, you know, when we do a bit more of an in-depth session, maybe do a few of these live and set them up, and perhaps you can do them with us, and we'll show you like how to convert some stuff from existing custom data into smart forms. That will bring some more of the contract use cases. Because for me, as a previous contract management pro, I would absolutely love to have been able to track maybe the contractual performance, maybe some key SLAs, KPIs in this manner, and get a lot of visibility over it. So I think it's exciting. But yeah, good question there, Jamie.
So I'll just jump in and talk about subgroups within a smart form before we spend a little while, and I know you just said then, Daniel, we'll have a dedicated session where we go through like smart forms in depth, and that will include the full gambit of configuring them. So I don't want to spend too long configuring them, but yeah,
we've got about 5 minutes here, James, left on this one. As a friendly time reminder for you. Live to keep you on track.
So in this particular tenant, you'll see, and this is just a bit to note, that if you have multiple smart forms, Gatekeeper groups them into a little drop-down menu. Whereas if you only have one, a bit like here, I only have one custom tab that's called infosec, so that's on its own. But if I would have had multiple, that would be in a drop-down menu too. But over here, I've got my compliance and due diligence smart form. And like I said, I haven't had this environment live for as long with smart form, so it only has a single snapshot. And in fact, if any of you go away and, you know, in the next week or so, get this switched on, configure your smart forms, this will probably be what it looks like for the near future, whilst you only have one iteration of a smart form being live. But ultimately, if you perform those repeat assessments, you'll start building up that trending graph. So what I just want to quickly talk about on here before we jump into like under the hood, the configuration, is the idea that, yeah, once you put that thought into configuration, like, do I want a separate smart form for each of my different topics that I want to score, or do I want to roll it up into one? What might be something to consider is that all of these different subgroups that I've got here, GDPR, modern slavery, EFG, resilience, and disaster recovery, these are all very different, but they do obviously fall under that remit of compliance and due diligence that you're performing against vendors. However, what you can also do if you want to have these in a sub, or all the subgroups in a single smart form, is when you're rolling them up, you can decide which of them is more important, right? So like data processing is one of those things that if you're not compliant in, you can be in serious trouble with regulatory bodies and industry standards and things like that. ESG is more of a new compliance topic, so definitely still important, but there's fewer regulatory bodies around there that might have issue with you not meeting certain down chain standards. So one thing I've configured here is, alongside these groups, which are just laid out like the same as before, they all have their fields that are within them that have the answers that contribute to the score. I'm able to say which of these I'm weighted more that rolls up towards that top score. So you can see GDPR contributes to 30% of the top level score. Modern slavery and disaster recovery are 25% each, but ESG is 20. So ultimately, these all need to add up to 100. And if everything in subgroups to you is equal, you could have just set them all to 25, but you can skew them slightly. So if one section is more important than the other, you can amend that weighting so that some of them, their scores count more or less than others.
James,
but that's something that, sorry.
Just quickly, it's a really good point, because I was just going to mention that the way that most people will probably be doing this now is, if they're doing it at all, is in a spreadsheet tracker, and that means you've got data somewhere else outside of Gatekeeper, and the whole point of us offering a platform that you can use is to unify your data, and of course take advantage of the workflows and the automations based on the data. So it's if you are doing it, it's fairly easy to replicate that inside of Gatekeeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let's jump onto that now. The whole, if people are Excel whizzes here and love their calculations, this might be something that's fun for them to look at. So when it comes to configuring smart forms, you would have to be a configuration level admin, and you'll have to have some knowledge of custom data to begin with. So it's definitely something I advise you checking the knowledge base for, or if you're working with an IC currently, having them walk you through. So in custom data, this is the area where you can add those custom groups, that base level thing we talked about of customizing your data model in Gatekeeper. But alongside custom tabs, now you have the option for smart forms. And I want to call this out, because this was really useful back when custom tabs launched. It's definitely the case that you don't have to always be building these from scratch, these smart forms. If you already have custom tabs, or if you already have lots of custom groups that you've already got data populated in, you don't have to delete all that and add it again and start from scratch. There is a feature, if you have a custom tab, let's say this InfoSec one I've got, if you want to then say, of these groups and fields and all the data that's in there, I want to assign scoring to it, there's a really simple option to just say, convert it to a smart form. And that can take you to it will move it over to this next configuration tab and allow you to start assigning those weightings and those scores to all of the fields that you've already built. So yeah, if you have existing custom data that you've already got up and running, you don't have to worry about redoing any work. It's just converting and then assigning some of the extra bits in there. So once you convert that and you end up with a smart form like this, the configuration of it will look very similar to any of you if you've seen Gatekeeper scorecards, or if you've configured any other software tool that has like weightings and scorings that contribute to that, or even Excel, like Daniel said, be relatively familiar. So you'll have those subgroups that we configured here with their appropriate weightings. And what you'll be able to do is, when you go on the configure weight screen, this is where you set everything up basically. So you'll see this one's already been done. So I'm not building this out from scratch, because Daniel's going to hit me with the 1 minute timer any second.
Oh, you're well past that.
Oh no.
just as a friendly reminder.
I'll
But no,
be
it's
really
an important
quick
bit. That's fine. All good. This is important to show. It's all good.
Sure. So each of these sections within the group, you decide whether or not they contribute to the total score to begin with. And then once you've decided that, you decide the weighting in there. And the
James,
same
just
thing.
quickly,
Yeah.
just quickly, something we've not got onto, but I just really want to say, because Justin just asked the question, smart forms is turned off by default
Oh,
for
yeah.
all tenants.
Yeah.
If you do want it on, we just need to turn it on. So we just need to get your
Yeah.
CSM, your AE, or whoever you've got that relationship with at the moment. They'll just go in and turn it on for you, and you can start doing that. We will actually ask you at the end, towards the end, if you want this, and then we can start getting that sorted for you. But yeah, good question, Justin. Just for context there. James,
Yeah, there's a
please
couple of
continue
features
that.
like that. But yeah, it's definitely worth raising.
Yes, no worries.
But yeah, I'll just do the cliff notes. So when you're in this configuration area, you decide which groups, like which sets of data, contribute to this whole smart form score, which fields within those groups also contribute towards the score. And this one is a very by the numbers. Every group is scored, every field is scored. But then also within the field, so I've got a drop down list here. What should those associated scores be? So like if a user says yes, that's 100% score. If a user says no, that's a 0. But you can also do the option of if a field is selected, that's sort of disregarded. It won't be given a bad score per se. And then once you've configured all that, and as you go, Gatekeeper is also keeping track to make sure that all the weightings add up to 100. Like you said, Daniel, everything needs to roll up to 100. So you're being thorough and you've configured a rounded off scorecard. Once you've configured all that, you can hit save, and then those scores will instantly be applicable to the data that you've got in there. What I do want to show is, I must have changed something, but I'm going to cancel that. What I do want to show is the idea that within a smart form, you can have groups that are scored and groups that are not. So I've got one here where this is a performance assessment scorecard for vendors where there's only one group that does contribute towards the score, but I've got another one here that's just extra context that I want, but doesn't necessarily contribute to how well the vendor is performing. And if I jump into the one that is scored, the same thing applies to fields in here as well. So you might have something similar where you have certain assessments you perform against your vendors. So I've got like, how's the relationship? How's the goods and services? Are they a fit for purpose? But then I've got extra context, just free text where I can get input from users that shouldn't really be able to contribute to the score because I just want open format ideas. And you can very easily configure a smart form that has that combination of stuff that I want ranked and scored and stuff that is just extra context in case I'm doing deeper dives into what's going on into the situation. So that's something to consider as well.
Perfect. James, just because we are out of time on smart forms, I know there's just one thing you wanted to show, which is the future iteration that is coming very soon.
Oh, yeah. Get that up.
And for context, in terms of the way in which you want to use this, we want to use all of this via workflows to make the most of workflows. The new update that we'll have coming out shortly will mean that you get to see a provisional score as people, as maybe a vendor or someone in your organization is completing these data points that are scored. You'll be able to see it on this right-hand side, which is also a more recent update that we've had and not showcased too much. But yeah, is there anything more on that one, James?
Yeah, no, I think just to reiterate, and I know we're not going to spend time on it per se, but the idea of once you've configured these smart forms, the best way that we recommend using them in a structured manner is embedding them in workflows. Absolutely. So a standard way of doing those vendor assessments could be during a vendor onboarding workflow. So for instance, here, as any users from Deloitte are logging into Gatekeeper, these are those 4 sections that contribute to that smart form. You can be getting the answers directly from the vendor, and those answers that they provide here will ultimately be pushed into the smart form and be what provides you with that score. And it's not necessarily the case that you want to take your vendors through a complete approval gauntlet once every year, but what you could do is you could build those scheduled reassessment workflows that completely automate this via like date-based triggers that will pull on those vendors at regular intervals and have them complete all or some of those smart form reassessment pieces. So that's the idea of, once you've got a smart form, embedding it in processes that you can put on autopilot will mean that any new vendors that you get in and any existing vendors that you have assessments for are constantly being reassessed and reevaluated, and you're getting some actionable insights from that data rather than just having data for data's sake. You're getting scores from it and so on. But yeah, at the moment, the scores that you see are just in the repository. So when the workflow is complete and you push that data out, You'll see it in the vendor tab. Anyone who can see the vendor will see that score. But yeah, that very soon coming iteration will show you that provisional score in the workflow form so that you can check what it looks like whilst you're doing the other vendor management processes.
Perfect. And we will, like I said, we'll do an absolute deep dive into smart forms. This is really just to give you a snapshot, a taster of what it looks like. If you're interested in it, we can get people to reach out and start working with you. I know we've got some questions on smart forms. We're just going to hold those to the end or come back to it after, because I'm very keen that we've got 4 other points, James. Not that you slightly overran just there, but you're on the right page for the next section that we really wanted to cover. We have kind of showcased something here already. We've just kind of formalized it a little bit more. So can we talk about the bulk NDA eSign workflow in that top left corner there?
So this is a new one of this is a new one of our best practice templates, which is one of those workflows where if you're adding a workflow to Gatekeeper, you either have the option to start with an empty board where you're adding the phases and all the steps and actions, but we have a set of pre-built ones based on common use cases or really powerful use cases that we see existing customers using at Gatekeeper. And this is the newest iteration based on a use case we've seen a few times now, but we decided it is a really cool one. So we formalized it into a best practice template. The scenario here, and I've named this NDA workflow, but it's not called the bulk NDA. I think it's called just bulk eSign workflow, is when you have a fairly standard terms contract that you either need signing en masse, like for many, many vendors at once, and you don't want to have to generate one by one, do it yourself, or you need to embed as part of a secondary step for another process that you don't want to have to slow down the initial process to get this done. But the same thing, you don't want to manually have to leave and go and do it yourself. So this is a workflow that all it does is, as soon as it starts, and we'll talk about how it starts in a second, generates a metadata record and draft, immediately converts that draft to PDF, and then immediately sends it to the vendor to sign. So that's why I said those sort of boilerplate standard agreements where there's no real amendments to the terms other than just plugging in some standard values. Well, there's none here. Other than plugging in some standard values.
NDAs are a really good use case here, James, for sure. Like, I would love to. I've dealt with many projects where suddenly you need to ramp up, get NDAs in place just to have those early conversations. Maybe we have a contract for someone else and it doesn't quite cover it. It's a great way just to get the contracts out the door.
Yeah. So, and you were right. We've in a success hours session, we've shown this taking place with like we talked about parallel workflows basically, didn't we? So in this scenario, I'm doing a vendor onboarding here where I'm getting the vendor to fill out smart forms and complete due diligence assessments, but I also want them to sign an NDA at the outset of our relationship just before we actually move through to the proper negotiations and discussions on the project. So someone's requested this vendor. They've also marked that they do need an NDA. The answer, they've said, will they require sharing sensitive information? I put yes. So when this vendor is approved and moves through to their vendor onboarding form, and at this point, ZenWork is going to log into the vendor portal and fill out those assessments. However, simultaneously, that automated eSign workflow has pulled ZenWork on as well. And if I open up this contract record, what we should see is this is their 2024 NDA. And if I scroll to the bottom, this is the contract document that Gatekeeper just instantly generated, and it sent it out to James Zen to eSign. So that's that first use case that you can quickly add this template, plug in your standard terms. It could be an NDA, it could be a letter of intent, any sort of introductory agreement, and then pair it with an existing onboarding process, and it could be triggered like that. However, the really cool use case for this, pretty much the reason we built this, is for scenarios where you might have like a new project that you're embarking on, or like a periodic thing where you need a large subset of your vendors to sign, a new DPA like once a year, or you're embarking on a project with 50 vendors and you need them to sign a new NDA for it because it's a sensitive project. But it's the same thing. You don't want to go and click the vendor, start the workflow. So what you can do is you can trigger this workflow in bulk via a mini status flag. So what I have over here is my vendor repository. And actually, let me delete most of these values because I'm not going to be triggering it for 100 vendors. But this could be done for, I'm going to do it for these 6 vendors, but you could do it for 60, you could do it for 600. It would work the same. So if any of you have done bulk updates, or if you've worked in Excel to tidy up your gatekeeper data. This will be familiar. This is just a CSV export of my gatekeeper repository. But all I'm going to change in this repository, hold on, it shouldn't have deleted those yet because I need to copy some values. All I'm going to change in this repository is there's a field I've got called NDA status. And for these vendors that I want to start the process for, I'm going to set that value to NDA required, and then I'm going to delete the remainder that I don't need anymore. So I've got, yeah, all these vendors, I've got 6 of them that all say NDA required, and I'm going to download them, download these as a CSV.
And James, that's based on a data point you already have in Gatekeeper, right?
Yeah, I added
point.
a custom field that I tied to this workflow. That's the best way to go about it, because then you can very easily see, looking at the vendor, have they been flagged for needing an NDA? And when it's done, have they got that NDA in place? That'll be visible as a custom field, like a status update.
Yeah.
But what I can do now is on my vendor repository, go bulk import, choose that file that I just created, the bulk NDA trigger, hit upload, and it says these 6 are about to be updated. And when I hit import, that same process that just happened on the workflow, where that one vendor ZenWork instantly triggered over, the same thing has happened for those 6. So instantly it's generated 6 new contracts and sent 6 contracts out for eSign. And that was very little work comparatively for how much admin was just done by the system. And again, I was only doing it for 6. It would work exactly the same if I did for 60 or 600 vendors. And now all I need to do in order to monitor these contracts being signed is just come back here and check the signatures ticking over. It should be the case that these contracts are being signed fairly quickly, because it's a really simple process for the vendor. But yeah, it's very easy to manage them from this Kanban board now.
And in the success hours series we did, we mentioned things around like notifying and reminding your vendors, your third parties to come in and sign these documents. So you can set all of that up on these kinds of phases to be as hands-off as possible before it, you're probably always going to get 1 or 2 that take forever.
The stragglers, yeah.
So it's always the way. But no, James, that was perfect. Is there anything else on this one, or should we move on to Market IQ, touchless contracts, and
no, I think that one's fairly simple. Unless we get any questions, but we can cover those at the end, because I feel really guilty that I took up so much time on smart forms. So we can move on to touchless contracts.
No, all good. No worries about that, dude. We like we said at the start, smart forms is the biggest update here. We can spend more time on it, so not an issue. Just as a preamble to this point, I'm still a massive fan of touchless contracts. It's probably one of those areas in Gatekeeper that isn't used as much. I think it's a really cool use case for non-disclosure agreements. James, do you want to just give us a bit of an insight into what is touchless contracts? Maybe a couple of lines on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of our best practice templates as well. So this is relatively easy to get set up in your Gatekeeper environment if it's something you're interested in. So what we mean by touchless contracts is, for you, when you get this set up in Gatekeeper, is the effort for you to get a vendor record created, an NDA created and then executed and signed should be minimum, i.e. touchless. So you're shifting the responsibility of compiling the data, of inputting or agreeing to the terms onto the vendor at the outset. So, and I'll show you what I mean by that by actually doing one live. So I'll show you the configuration update that's been made available with this, and then I'll show you what it looks like to vendors when they're filling this out. So when you're configuring these touchless forms, there's some options that come along with them, like, do I want the vendor to be able to suggest changes to my standard terms? And in this case, it's an NDA, so to my standard NDA terms. But now there's also the option to say, do I want the vendor to be able to apply Market IQ to their own vendor record? So let's open up touchless form, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So this is page 1 of a touchless contract, and I'm just going to get a...
And James, this is the view that the vendor, the third party, would have based on a link that you would have sent to them from Gatekeeper, and you can send that link directly from, say, the employee portal. If you have that, you have those links available to view there.
Yeah, you can send them directly from Gatekeeper like this, or you can copy that link and you could send it to them in another way, like WhatsApp, by email. You could have it in your email footer just as a message to say, anytime you want to do business with us, you will need to onboard yourself in Gatekeeper and sign this NDA. So you can go ahead and do that and self-serve and do it your own way. And that's the idea behind access to this link, is that as long as the vendor has been given this, they can go ahead and get all this setup stuff done themselves, and it should be relatively touchless for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in the shoes of the vendor now. Perfect.
Yep. So I'm a vendor, and I'm dealing with, let's assume, Gatekeeper or Synergy Technology Limited, which is actually our old name that needs updating. But on this screen, because I'd enabled that option to propose changes, they can either say, I want to change this contract before I sign it, or they can say, I'm happy to sign it. But then the first step for the vendor in terms of getting their vendor record set up is they'll put their email address in, and I'm going to choose the CRO of, I think CRO is an executive of Bentley Motors. Oh, marketing. I was close. Of
No
Bentley
worries.
Motors. And this is the point where all they had to do was put in their email, but Gatekeeper will go and fetch from industry data sources information around who they were. So as you can see, it filled out his job title, his name, and information about the company he comes from. So it saved him a bit of time. But because sometimes this might not be complete, or he might want to change it himself, it allows him the option to input things. So for instance, who better to make changes or put more data in than the vendor themselves? So this Andreas is going to put in his company registration number here because that wasn't entered. But because we enabled Market IQ, which is our integration with this specific one, which is our integration with CreditSafe for financial checks, what the next step for the vendor is going to be is not just firing this off to get that NDA generated, is he's going to be able to actually perform the check and match his organization with a CreditSafe record. So the top one by confidence here, I think, is the one we want to use. So at this point, Andreas can hit apply. There's just a note to say they can also skip this if they don't find the vendor that they're searching for and they don't want to hold up the process, like tinkering or figuring out what's wrong with the information they put in. But there's one that's matched instantly here. So I'm going to hit apply, and screen will just load for a second because this is going to generate quite a few things in the system now.
We're doing this in real time as well, just to show you, like, oh, we've not sped up or done anything. So we're just.
If I go back there, actually that's jumped over. Oh, because Andreas said he didn't want to change it. So what's happened in this workflow is we've got a contract record for the NDA, the vendor record for Bentley Motors, and it's bypassed any of the negotiation because the vendor said they didn't want to do that. But if I open up this vendor record, what we'll see is some of the information that was compiled by that user that was entered in there. So handily, we've also already got some key data without us actually having to do any work. And if I navigate over to the Market IQ tab here, we'll see that it's already been connected to CreditSafe, and we can already instantly get some financial risk data about that vendor. And actually, there's no real risk here. They're a very healthy company financially. So we've already got some good insights from good market data sources about them before we even have jumped into proper contract negotiations. That's just from them clicking through 4 tabs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, James, I was talking to you about this, I think, yesterday, and I was saying that, if this functionality was in Gatekeeper when I was using it, we had a rule pretty much that any new vendor that we engage, we just need a non-disclosure agreement put in place up front just to make sure we were covered for any conversations, any information sharing, things like that. And I was saying to you, like, this is perfect. Like, I could have self-served every NDA, have every vendor and contract record built in advance, got a check saved through Market IQ in advance, because then when we come to onboard that vendor, don't need to find their information. The record's already there. I already understand if they're a credit risk or at risk of not existing any longer, and it's just it's going to speed up the process for everyone involved. So really happy with that.
But yeah, then that vendor will be instantly available then. So if you want to come on and request request like the proper contract. So if I go and say, I can't find Bentley Motors, I need to find out why. But then that vendor would be available. Oh, it's not live yet. It hasn't been, it needs to complete the NDA workflow. So that's my config settings that are holding me up there. But once I've got that vendor completed the NDA workflow, then any user who wants to raise the full contract and full onboarding process, they'll be available there. And handily, they'll already have some of the metadata pre-filled. So it's like an internal contract manager. I don't have to go and either ask them for information or go and start, looking on Companies House and other sources and things like that.
Absolutely. Perfect. Was there anything else on this one? Because I'm super conscious of time. We've only got 15 minutes left, James.
No, that's a fairly simple one. It can be just as long as you've got Market IQ in your tenant, you can switch that one on fairly easily for an existing touchless form.
Perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that. So Well, we've got two more to go through, and the first one we want to go over is around teams, teams
Sure.
ownership, teams approvals. It'd be good for you to set some context, maybe just by starting off in teams and just
Yeah.
describing what that is.
Sure. So a team is a record type in the same way that contracts and vendors are some of the core records in Gatekeeper, where you're capturing information around elements of your organization. The main area that teams come into play is, I mean, you can see it on this screen where I'm looking at these teams, is teams will have contracts linked to them. So who's getting these services from the vendor in this contract, who's paying for the services as well, like which team's budget is it coming from. So that there's an element of responsibility there. Like if I'm a user as well from this team, I'll, depending on user permissions, the very common permission will be, if I'm an own team based user, I'll be able to see all these contracts if I'm in this team. The reason that this new update is a really useful one is I'll navigate over to the users area. And this might not be something that many people on this call have seen if you're not a user admin, but if you have, it'll immediately, hopefully ring a bell. But when you're adding a user, one thing that you'll know is that the team they belong to is a mandatory setting. A user has to sit in a particular team in order for you to be able to add them to Gatekeeper. You can't leave that blank. However, when it comes to their tasks in workflows, a very common way of assigning tasks to groups, like if anyone belongs to this group, they can action the approval or they can complete this review on behalf of the group, is via a feature called workflow groups. But what you'll note here is these are not mandatory. So these technically you can add a user assigning the team, but it's very possible that if you have a team that represents the contract management or legal function, that could be a duplicate of an existing team or department, and B, it could be something that you miss adding a user to in future. And so that's one of the problems that we've sort of looked to negate with this update. So if I navigate over to a workflow now, just highlighting that a team is a feature that a user will always belong to, and I go to, this will be a standard process to explain it. If I go to a phase of this workflow, let's say the draft setup phase, like an initial contracting step, what you'll see is this currently is assigned to the workflow group called contract management / legal. So any user who's been added to that group will be able to open up cards on this phase. They'll be able to like approve them, revise the drafts, upload new versions, amend the form whilst the card is sat here. But there is that problem of, let's say I have a new starter. Let's say, Daniel, you joined a new organization. You were added to the legal team, but someone forgot to add you to this additional supplementary group. You would be in this position where you wouldn't be able to access cards on this phase, even though technically you belong to the same team as everyone. So now, because this is sort of a duplicate of the existing team, you can just say, rather than overcomplicating it, where we have a workflow group and a team which should have the same set of users because they all perform the same function, let's just make it this phase owned by the team, hit save, and anytime a card lands on there, anyone who is a member of this legal team, so I think there's only like 2 people in here, but anyone who has been added to this team, well, there's 3 people, would be able to access cards here and action them on behalf of the team. So it just means that, yeah, you might have a bit less workflow config to do when you're setting up a workflow with all your different access groups and things like that, with all your different task forces, but also like anytime you have new starters moving in or out of departments, as long as they belong to the appropriate team and that team has been assigned on the workflow, you don't have to worry about, well, are they a member of the right group to be able to approve things or review what's going on. So yeah, that's the elevator pitch of the update that's gone live there.
No, that was good, James. And the reality was that we weren't able to select teams prior to that. So we were like, oh, how do we get people in the same team together? Well, we'll go and make a workflow group. And then if, like you said, it was a duplication of data, there is still a place for workflow groups. I just want to point that out. Like, if you've got a bunch, almost like a group of people from multiple different teams or different areas, it might just be easier to make a workflow group with those specific people, or if you only need individual contributors from various teams, to make a workflow group to restrict that access to a specific phase. So there's absolutely a use case for workflow groups. It's just taking away some of the hack of not having a team effectively. We're just giving you teams because it makes way more sense.
Yeah, exactly. There's still a place for workflow groups. That's why we haven't removed it. But yeah, if you do have workflow groups that are just one-to-one replications of teams, now you can just move it all over to teams and just retire the workflow groups if that works for you.
James, quick question from Suzanne. Can we see who's in the team on the workflow?
Oh,
Can we click in on the team
I
there?
wonder. So, like, if this is owned by, let me change this to a team. I'm wondering that there is probably a way of being able to see it. I don't think like by hovering over it, it will tell you, but there's probably some element of like tagging a
Sorry,
user. It will,
it's a
but
good
yeah,
question. We
I
we
don't,
can
that's
absolutely
a
take
very
that
good
away
question.
for sure, because that makes sense. And
Mm,
just maybe to explain one thing in terms of why we're doing this is to get these kind of questions to see if there's anything we've forgotten about. Typically, the way we release any product feature at Gatekeeper is we're always typically do like an MVP, a minimum viable product, to get it out there, get testing it, to make sure people actually like it before investing too much time in it. But that makes a lot of sense, Suzanne. So yeah, great question there. James, I'm super conscious of time. I feel like I'm
yeah,
going on at you about time in this
yeah,
one.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna get it in the neck afterwards. Can we go to the last one, which is tin matching, please?
Yeah. So
And
tin
the
matching
context.
is tin matching as context. It's another one of those, I'll just say at the outset, a bit like smart forms when Justin raised that earlier. It's a feature that is free on all plans, but, and you'll see in a second when I navigate up to the repository why, but it's one that we haven't enabled by default for all Gatekeeper tenants, but you can just get it enabled. Just reach out to your CSM or your AE, or if you're in contact with your IC more regularly, just reach out to your Gatekeeper contact and they can switch it on for you. But tin matching, tin standing for tax ID number or tax identification number, basically means that the information that you're getting from your vendors, so I've got one here, Okta Inc., and the tax ID, the information that you're getting from your vendors or from users inputting into Gatekeeper, specifically this field, this new tax ID core field, can be automatically verified with, again, industry data. It's worth noting that this current iteration, this first iteration, only will verify US-based vendors. So there's an element of Gatekeeper doing a check, and it will only try and even perform the tin verification if you have noted that the registered address is United States. And what it will do is it will compare the legal name that you enter and the tax ID with what is on file with IRS in this case, because it's US vendors, and it will just basically run that check with the IRS and then come back to you and instantly let you know, has it matched their records so that you've got accurate and valid data in your system, or could it not be found? Did it explicitly not match? Then you maybe need to go and check, like, should this be something that we're including in our own like ERP systems and things like that? Because if it's not valid, you don't want to start syncing that across to other areas of your, tech stack, because you're just polluting it with unvalidated data. So in this case, I'm onboarding a new vendor called Okta. I've filled out their tax ID. I've registered them as US. And when I hit approve here I have not filled out their type. Okay, let me just give them a type real quick. When I hit approve here and Gatekeeper creates that vendor, that's the point when it will check them with the IRS. Oh, and that was very quick. I was hoping it was going to give me the loading page. So once you Gatekeeper on
James,
a
just on that,
workflow,
just quickly,
yeah,
the loading page, please just explain that just in case when people actually
yeah,
two things. This is turned off by default, right?
yeah,
As
yeah, yeah,
well. So if you're interested in this one, it's one of those that we need to get turned on in your tenant. And yeah,
yeah.
is there a separate page that maybe comes up because that was rapid there?
Yeah. There isn't, but there's a separate banner that applies here. So when you've created the vendor and you've got these values in, if they match that whole being a US vendor and having both of these populated, normally this will say pending and it'll have like a little gray marker. But because this check ran annoyingly quickly, it instantly said tin matched. And so I've got the banner up there letting me know that it at least is valid. But usually it'll take, I mean, it won't even take that long. It'll take 10 to 15 seconds, but I thought I at least would have had time to jump in and show. But then the tin has been matched here. And the reason, I'll just call back to this, the reason this is off by default is when you have tin matching available. So it's really useful to have on a workflow, because then at least whilst you're onboarding the vendor, that's the perfect time to be able to go back and ask for more information, or at least ask the vendor to tidy the details up themselves if you have vendor portal there. But the reason that it's off by default is when you have it switched on, it adds this additional metadata section to your data tab for your vendors. So if you're not considering using this, if you don't have any US-based vendors, maybe leave it off until we release future iterations that match with other governmental bodies to get their or industry data feeds to match tins, or to do the tin matching, because at the moment you'll just have this empty for all of your vendors, because it'll be there but you won't be using it yet. So when you switch it on, this will be one of those widgets that you get with your vendors, letting you know, has the tin, so i.e. tax ID and legal name, been matched. And there's also an option here for admins to restart it if you've already got the data in there, but you've switched the tin matching on retroactively. You want to perform that check.
Amazing, James. Perfect. And I'm just going to, I'll come back to this in just a moment, but first I'm just going to ask Lucy if she can bring up a poll. We just want to ask a poll, and it's something I alluded to earlier on. If there's any one of these 5 features that we've mentioned so far, or 2 features, because they're the ones that need to be turned on, that you're interested in, please let us know. We can then go back to your CSM for you and get them to reach out to you to sort that out. So the 2 features that need to be toggled on that none of you will see right now because we haven't toggled them on for you is smart forms and tin matching. If you're interested, let us know. If it's both, let us know. It's multiple choice, and we'll get your CSMs to reach out this week and sort that out for you. James, was that everything we wanted to cover on tin matching? I believe it was.
On tin matching, yeah, I suppose it's
Just go on for your SSO piece. That's fine. That's what I'm setting you up for here, because I know you want to talk about the SSO piece quickly.
Whilst we're talking about tin. So yeah, at the moment it's just US, but there will be future iterations that do validate other countries. But yeah, just worth noting that it's US only at the moment. So SSO bypass, I think it's really cool. Some people on the call might also think it's really cool. So if you have a specific SSO method enabled for your environment, so like some of you might use an SSO provider like OneLogin or Okta. Some of you might have used sort of our custom SAML 2.0 method that might connect to like Jump Cloud or Microsoft Azure. What you might know is that, and you might have experienced this, is when you lock your environment down to this, so only people who exist in those Active Directories can get into Gatekeeper, very secure, very popular with IT teams, is that Gatekeeper can no longer get in and help you unless you set them up a guest profile, like James Ince at your company's email domain.com. But that's cumbersome because then, I've got to maintain lots of different logins, and also it might expire and you've got to go to your internal IT admins and get it set up. However, now we've got a setting to say, when you're locking your environment down to something like this, if you toggle this on, anyone who exists in your user repository, so that's really important to note. It's not every single Gatekeeper employee. Any gatekeeperhq.com email domain that you've added to your user repository here, when you toggle this on, will be able to get in via our SSO method, which is just Google single sign-on. So even if you can keep your tenant locked down to one login, but let's say you have an issue and you want to work with your implementation consultant, or you want your CSM to guide you through something or discuss a feature, without having to sit on a call with them and you click around, you can just quickly switch this on. They'll be able to log in and look at it with you. And then, if you have fairly stringent IT policies, once you're done with that window of time when you've opened it up, you can switch this back off, and then it's back to just one login only. So really useful if you do have regular interactions with an IC, with your CSM, even with our support team, and you've added them in. One of those, it's a really simple toggle setting to allow just a really small handful of users, i.e. only the users that you've decided in this area, to bypass your SSO method for a period of time that you decide. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, by the way, so do I. I was giving you a hard time because I know you really wanted to nerd out this, but I had this exact scenario when I was a customer. The IT and InfoSec team wanted everything locked down, and there was times when I was like, "Oh, James, I really want to show you this," or with my, we had another IT as well, and the CSM like, "Please, can you check this out?" And they're like, "Oh, well, we can't get into your tenant, so like, no. I have to do a call or record like a Zoom video showing everything, and it actually just delays the solve, and it's like." It's always you got like maybe the IT team over there and you kind of blame them, but there's good reasons for it. So I'm a big fan of this, and just it was a great point there, to satisfy teams such as those strict IT teams where you can just toggle this back off after the time period. James, we have hit the hour mark, so I just want to say thank you, by the way, because I know you've just covered and spoke super fast. We can linger for a couple of minutes. I appreciate that it's 5:30 in the UK. It's various other times elsewhere across the world. We tried to answer most of the questions live. I think we may have missed one from Suzanne about matching duplicates and checking for duplicates across the vendor base. I don't have an immediate answer, so we're going to come back to you on that outside of the webinar, Suzanne. I haven't forgotten to address that. I think everything else has been addressed. If you do have any questions, just pop them in now. If we can't answer them immediately, we're taking it away. Lucy, can you just do the final poll just before? I appreciate people are going to start dropping off in a moment. We just want to gauge the interest of whether we should do more product release webinars like this that give you a bit of a showcase, give you a bit of insight, maybe show a little bit of config. We're not quite sure on the balance yet. If you like these kind of sessions, perhaps we need to reduce the amount of topics, given that we somehow crammed 6 in and we kind of rushed a couple. We're still learning and figuring this out. But let us know, and that'd be super helpful. But James, yeah, appreciate you going through anything. Was there anything else, James, that has got you excited that you want to talk about? Anything before we let everyone go?
Good Lord. I mean, the future versions of smart forms will be good. And yeah, if you do have feedback on those, especially like Daniel mentioned, like around what use cases do you have in mind and you're considering using, definitely reach out to your CSM or IC, because we're also interested in gathering feedback, because this feature is brand new. It's one of those where, like you saw that screenshot earlier, where the preview doesn't show in workflows yet, but the initial version of the feature is launching. We very much love the iterative approach, where we love getting something into your hands so you can be getting use from it whilst we're still building on it. We don't want to have to make you wait, months and years for a feature to get the final version ready, if we're going to be adding new features and topics to it anyway. So yeah, if you do get to enable smart forms, please get some feedback in towards our product team, so we can start either maybe rolling out some best practice templates for them, or crowdsource some new ideas.
And you can always if you just want to talk to James or I as well, we're more than happy to jump on a call, especially as I feel like you may have seen our faces a lot now over the last year. Perfect. Just one thing I wanted to note here. You probably noticed we've not shown too much on generative AI and things like that. We're doing a lot of work behind the scenes. We're only going to implement it when it makes sense. We are working on some really cool extraction stuff that I'm super excited about. But yeah, I just wanted to squeeze that in. But thanks everyone for joining. Super appreciate your attention, and yeah, we'll see you soon.